heart of an ancient mansion, buried beneath the ornate floors and centuries-old walls, something far more sinister than dust and debris was waiting to be uncovered. A secret, hidden from the world for generations, was about to rise to the surface, forever altering the history of the mansion and its long-forgotten occupants. It began as an ordinary renovation project. The mansion had stood for over 2 centuries, an imposing structure nestled in the quiet countryside, surrounded by dense trees and thick fog, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a Gothic novel, mysterious, grand and yet strangely forlorn. Over the years, rumors about the mansion had surfaced, whispers of strange occurrences and strange disappearances that tied the house to the dark heart of local legend, but no one had ever dared to explore the house deeply enough to uncover what lay beneath. That was until the new owners, an ambitious young couple, eager to restore the once proud estate, hired a crew to renovate the mansion's crumbling interior. It was supposed to be a simple task. The mansion, though old, had been preserved in relatively good condition, but as the workmen began pulling up the floorboards of the grand dining hall, they discovered something unsettling. At first, it was just a small, narrow passageway hidden beneath the boards. Strange, yes, but not entirely out of the ordinary for a house of this age. The history of old estates was often full of hidden rooms, secret corridors, and concealed staircases, but when they ventured further into the passageway, it became clear that this was no ordinary hiding place. The walls of the passage were lined with dark, damp stones, and the air grew thick with a musty smell. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere seemed to change, growing heavier with every step. And then they reached it. At the very end of the passage, beneath the mansion's main hall, was a small, dimly lit chamber, and inside that chamber, the discovery was made. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than the remnants of old furniture and discarded relics, but as they explored further, their flashlights flickered over something far darker. In the corner of the room, half buried under a pile of debris, were what appeared to be human bones, dozens of them, all small, all child-sized. The shock of the discovery hit like a wave. The workers quickly realized that what they had uncovered was no ordinary grave. These weren't the remains of people who had died of natural causes. No, these children had been buried alive, sealed in the floor beneath the mansion, as if their lives had never mattered at all. The implications of what they had just discovered were enough to send chills down anyone's spine. How could this happen in a mansion so grand, so prestigious? The couple immediately called the authorities. For hours, the room was combed for further evidence, and forensic experts were brought in to examine the bones. But the story only grew darker. As the bones were carefully examined, it became apparent that some of the children had been buried in a state of unrest, their faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror. They had been placed in the ground hastily, with little regard for what had happened to them in their final moment. But that wasn't all. As the experts dug deeper, they found something even more disturbing. Alongside the skeletal remains, they discovered a collection of old letters, yellowed with age and brittle to the touch. These letters were not from the time of the children's deaths. They were much older, dating back to the mansion's original inhabitants. They spoke of a family that had long since disappeared from the town's memory, a family whose history was intertwined with the mansion itself. The letters revealed secrets, dark, horrifying secrets, that hinted at a curse, a hidden tragedy, and a mystery that no one had ever been brave enough to solve. With each letter uncovered, the story of the dead children and their tragic fate unfolded like a twisted tale from the past. The mansion's original owners, the Blackwell family, had been known for their wealth and power, but no one had known the dark side of their legacy. The letters spoke of loss, madness, and desperation, but the most chilling revelation came when they spoke of the family's need to keep certain things hidden, things that should never see the light of day. What had happened to these children? Who had placed them in the mansion's foundation? And why had their deaths been covered up for so long? The answers were buried beneath the mansion's walls, and with each new discovery, the mystery only deepened. The mansion, it seemed, had been hiding more than just its age. It had been concealing a story of death, loss, and betrayal. This was just the beginning of a journey that would reveal the horrifying truth about the mansion's past. The children buried beneath the floorboards were not just victims. They were part of something far darker, a secret so terrifying that even the mansion itself had sought to keep it buried forever. As the workers and authorities continued their investigation, they began to piece together the fragments of the mansion's dark history, but no one could have predicted the chilling secrets that still lay hidden in its walls, secrets that would shake the very foundation of the mansion and reveal a truth far darker than anyone could have imagined. The house that claimed its victims, the house that had buried its secrets so deep, was now being forced to reveal them, one horrifying piece at a time. As the dust settled on the discovery beneath the mansion's floor, the atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. The mansion, once silent and forgotten, was now alive with the sound of workers, authorities, and experts, all rushing to uncover the truth behind the buried children. The more they unearthed, the more the house seemed to whisper its dark secrets, as if the walls themselves longed to be freed from the weight of the past. Days turned into weeks, as investigators combed through the remnants of the Blackwell family's estate. Each piece of evidence they uncovered seemed to pull them further down a rabbit hole of unsettling truth. The bones of the children were carefully catalogued, and forensic scientists worked tirelessly to determine how they had been killed when they had died, and most crucially, who had been responsible. But the most disturbing discovery lay in the letters found with the remains. These letters, once thought to be mere family correspondence, revealed a terrifying tale of a family that had descended into madness, violence, and something far worse. The Blackwell family had been powerful, wealthy, and influential, but it was their influence that allowed them to conceal the truth for so long. The letters spoke of a father, Reginald Blackwell, who was known for his charisma, his wealth, and his ruthless ambition. He had built the mansion with an almost obsessive determination, pouring all of his energy into its construction. But as the letters revealed, there was something far darker at play. Reginald had been obsessed with preserving the family name, and he believed that in order to do so, he had to secure his family's legacy for generations to come. His wife, Evelyn, had been just as ambitious, but it was their desire for power and influence that had led them down a path from which there was no return. The family's wealth had been built on questionable foundations, and Reginald was willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to protect it. One of the letters, dated several years before the children's deaths, detailed a chilling conversation between Reginald and a mysterious figure known only as the heir. The letter was written in a shaky hand, almost as if the writer had been in a state of panic, and it spoke of a bargain struck between Reginald and this unknown person. The details were vague, but one thing was clear. The bargain involved the children of the Blackwell family. The letter referred to a ritual, an ancient and forbidden practice, that according to Reginald, would ensure the family's fortune for generations to come. It seemed as though Reginald believed that the lives of his children could be sacrificed to secure the Blackwell legacy. There was talk of sealing the bloodline and sacrificing the purest souls, and it became clear that the children's deaths were no mere accident or tragedy. They had been part of something far more sinister. As investigators delved deeper into the history of the Blackwell family, they discovered that the mansion itself had been built over something ancient, something buried long before the Blackwells had come to claim the land. Local folklore spoke of an old burial ground that predated the Blackwell Estate, a place that was said to be cursed by the spirits of the dead. But Reginald had dismissed these rumors as superstition, believing that the land itself held the power to protect his family. It seemed, however, that the land had other plans. The letters revealed that Reginald had made a dangerous pact with forces beyond his understanding, forces that had not only influenced his family's destiny, but had taken control of it. The mysterious figure known as the heir was believed to be an intermediary between Reginald and these dark forces,
and it appeared that the deaths of the Blackwell children were not an act of cruelty, but a necessary step in fulfilling a pact that had been made long before the Blackwells had even set foot on the land. As the workers and investigators continued their work, the mansion began to reveal more secret hidden passageways, sealed rooms, and strange symbols etched into the walls were uncovered at every turn. The most terrifying discovery, however, came when a group of historians stumbled upon a hidden diary buried deep within the walls of the mansion. This diary, written by Reginald Blackwell himself, contained the darkest of confessions. The diary spoke of the family's descent into madness. It chronicled Reginald's increasing obsession with the pact he had made, his growing paranoia, and his belief that the death of his children was the price he had to pay to protect his family's wealth. He wrote about the strange rituals that had been conducted in the mansion's deepest rooms, rituals that had involved not only his own children, but others who had mysteriously disappeared over the years. It became clear that Reginald had known exactly what he was doing. He had sacrificed his children in the hope of preserving the Blackwell fortune, believing that the dark forces he had aligned himself with would grant him immortality, power, and influence beyond his wildest dream. But as the diary made chillingly clear, Reginald's pact had come with a terrible cost, one that would haunt the Blackwell family for generations. The investigation into the mansion and its dark past continued, but the more they uncovered, the more questions remained. What had happened to the Blackwell family? Why had their wealth and power come at such a steep price? And most importantly, what had become of the spirit of the mansion itself? As the authorities worked to uncover the truth, they began to realize that the mansion was not just a building, it was a living entity, one that had been built on a foundation of darkness and blood. And as they dug deeper into the Blackwell family's tragic history, they discovered that the mansion had claimed far more than just the lives of the children buried beneath its floorboard. It had claimed the very souls of the Blackwell family, trapping them in a never-ending cycle of despair and death. The mansion, it seemed, was alive with the echoes of its past, a past that refused to stay buried, no matter how hard the family had tried to conceal it. The deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. In the weeks that followed the discovery of the Blackwell children's remains, investigators and historians worked tirelessly to piece together the story of what had happened within the walls of the mansion. The bones of the children, carefully examined by forensic scientists, revealed something even more disturbing: the manner in which they had died. It wasn't just murder, it was a ritual. The cause of death, initially believed to be violent, had a more sinister origin. The children's bodies showed signs of being subjected to strange procedures, symbols carved into their skin, scars resembling ancient runes, and unusual puncture marks that seemed to align with the ancient texts that had been discovered among the Blackwell family's personal belongings. These marks, though faint, suggested that the children had been part of some sort of occult ceremony, a ritual intended to seal their family's future in blood. The mansion had long been suspected of being cursed, but now it seemed that the curse was not just a myth. The very foundation of the Blackwell estate was steeped in dark practices, rituals and pacts made with forces unknown. It was clear now that the mansion's history was not just built on wealth and power, but on bloodshed and secrets too monstrous to comprehend. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence came when the investigators uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the mansion, sealed off for centuries. The room had been kept locked away, with no known entry. When the hidden passageway was finally uncovered, the chamber revealed an altar, a stone table covered in deep black stains that no amount of cleaning could erase. Surrounding the altar were broken candles, ancient incantations carved into the walls, and a faded tapestry depicting scenes of sacrifice, rituals, and dark figures draped in robes. This room, it seemed, was where the Blackwell family had conducted their most secretive and forbidden practices. It was here beneath the mansion's floorboards that the children had met their tragic end. As the team pieced together the history of the Blackwell family, they realized that the mansion itself had become an instrument of evil, a place where the dead were not allowed to rest, and where the Blackwell name was built on an unholy foundation. While the investigators scoured the mansion for more evidence, something else began to happen. Something more unsettling than any of the findings. Locals who had long avoided the mansion started to speak of strange occurrences. At night, they claimed to hear the sounds of children's laughter echoing from the mansion's hollow halls. Others swore they'd seen shadowy figures moving behind the windows, figures that vanished as soon as they were noticed. But the most chilling reports came from those who dared to enter the mansion, hoping to find more answers. They never returned. A series of disappearances began to plague the investigators. Each time a new team of historians or paranormal experts entered the mansion, they vanished without a trace. The police were baffled. They combed the surrounding area, checked every nearby building, and even questioned the locals. But the missing people seemed to evaporate into thin air. Rumors began to spread, and it became clear that something was very wrong with the Blackwell mansion. Some believed it was cursed beyond repair. Others insisted that the spirits of the dead children still haunted the house, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to uncover their dark past. But what truly terrified the investigators was the strange, unexplainable phenomenon that occurred in the mansion at night. Some claimed the walls themselves seemed to breathe, as if the house were alive, pulsing with a rhythm of its own. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural pressure, and many described feeling an overwhelming sense of dread as they entered. The mansion was no longer just a house. It was a prison, trapping the souls of the Blackwell family, and anyone foolish enough to enter its door. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that Reginald Blackwell's pact with the dark forces had not only taken the lives of his children, but had cursed his entire lineage. His obsession with wealth and power had led him to make a deal so horrific that even the mansion itself had become an extension of his sin. The family had sold their souls for immortality, but instead they had inherited a never-ending nightmare.
One by one, the investigators began to piece together the fate of the Blackwell family. Evelyn Blackwell, Reginald's wife, had vanished mysteriously shortly after the deaths of the children. She was never seen again, and no trace of her body was ever found. Some believed she had been consumed by the darkness of the house, while others thought that she had tried to escape, only to be trapped by the curse that now haunted her family. Reginald Blackwell, once a powerful and influential man, had faded into obscurity after the tragic events surrounding his children. Some claimed that he had gone mad, locked away in a room within the mansion, babbling about the price of power and the consequences of his actions. Others believed that he had simply vanished, taking his secrets with him. But the mansion, it seemed, was never finished with the Blackwell family. As the investigators dug deeper, they found more unsettling evidence. In the deepest recesses of the mansion's foundations, they discovered the remnants of strange rituals, items buried beneath the floorboards, inscriptions hidden in the walls, and a cryptic symbol carved into the very stone that held the mansion together. The symbol was unmistakable. It was a representation of an ancient cult, a secret society that believed in the power of blood sacrifices to secure wealth and influence. The mansion had not only been a home for the Blackwell family, it had been their tomb. And yet, even with all the evidence pointing to dark forces at play, no one could explain why the mansion had such a hold on its visitors. Why did it call to them? Why did it keep its secrets so tightly guarded, even after death had claimed those who dared to uncover the truth? Some believed the mansion was a trap, an inescapable prison for the souls of the Blackwell family. Others whispered that the house itself was sentient, alive with the power of the dark forces that had claimed the family. Whatever the truth was, one thing was clear: the mansion would never give up its secrets. It had claimed the lives of the Blackwell children. It had claimed the sanity of the family. And now, it was claiming those who sought to uncover its dark past. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the mansion's curse was far from over. The Blackwell legacy had been sealed in blood, and the mansion would forever be a monument to the darkness that had claimed them. The mansion had always stood as a symbol of power and affluence in the community, but now it was a cursed relic, a silent witness to its past sins.
The Blackwell name, once whispered with respect, now hung in the air like a dark cloud. For generations the mansion had been left to rot, abandoned and untouched by the hands of man, an unsettling monument to the terrible things that had transpired within its walls. But as the years passed, new rumors began to surface. The mansion, it seemed, had never truly been empty, despite the decaying walls, the shattered windows, and the sagging roof. Some claimed they had heard voices coming from within. Children's laughter, faint but chilling, echoed through the hollow halls on windless nights. Others reported seeing strange lights flickering in the upper windows, even though the house had no power, and no one had lived there for decades. The mansion had become something more than just a house. It had become a place of legend. In the early 1900s, a group of paranormal investigators set out to uncover the truth. Armed with the latest in occult research and equipment, they ventured into the mansion, determined to solve the mystery of the Blackwell curse once and for all. Their investigation would not only uncover more about the Blackwell family, but would also reveal the true nature of the mansion's power. At first, the investigators found little evidence of paranormal activity. The mansion's dilapidated condition made it difficult to pinpoint anything unusual. The walls creaked and groaned with the weight of age, and the floorboards threatened to collapse with each step. Yet something seemed to stir beneath the surface, an unease that the investigators couldn't shake, no matter how much they searched. Then, on the third night of their investigation, something extraordinary happened. The team had gathered in the grand foyer, where the large staircase led to the second floor, and the faint traces of a long-forgotten family portrait still adorned the walls. They were setting up their equipment when, without warning, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Their breath formed icy clouds in the air, and a thick fog began to swirl around them, materializing as if the very mansion itself were exhaling its foul breath. A sound began to emerge from the shadows, soft at first, like the whispers of voices from a distant past. The whispers grew louder, until they formed words that sent a chill down their spine. The voices seemed to speak in unison, echoing through the walls of the mansion, a haunting chorus of the Blackwell family's tragic fate. "Don't disturb us," the voices chanted. "Don't awaken what sleeps." The investigators were paralyzed with fear. They had heard of spirits haunting the house, but nothing could have prepared them for this. The air grew thick with an oppressive presence, as if the very house was alive and conscious, warning them to leave before it claimed them. In the distance they could hear the faint sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, as though someone or something was walking toward them. The investigators rushed to the staircase, hoping to make their way to the attic, where they had been told the answers lay. But before they could reach the stairs, the air turned rancid, and a loud crash echoed through the hall. The investigators froze, their eyes widening in horror, as the ceiling above them began to crack, as though something enormous was moving within the walls. Then, without warning, the floor beneath them buckled. The house itself seemed to be shifting, as if it were trying to swallow them whole. The investigators scrambled for the exit, but the door, once easily accessible, now refused to open. The windows too were sealed shut by some unseen force. It was as though the mansion had decided that the secrets it had hidden for so long would not be revealed so easily. Panicking, the investigators attempted to call for help, but their phones and radios were dead. Nothing but static filled the air. It was as if the mansion was blocking all communication with the outside world, trapping them in its cursed grip. One of the investigators, a young woman named Clara, felt a hand brush against her arm. It was cold, icy cold, and she turned, expecting to see one of her colleagues. Instead, she was met by a pale, translucent figure, a young child, no older than 6 or 7, with hollow eyes and an empty, twisted smile. Clara screamed and stumbled backward, but the child remained, its eyes following her every movement. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the child vanished into the darkness, leaving Clara trembling and unable to move. The others too were haunted by the chilling presence of the spirits that lingered in the mansion, tormenting them with visions of the past. Despite the growing sense of danger, the investigators pressed on. They knew that the key to unlocking the mansion's curse lay in the attic, where Reginald Blackwell's personal diaries and letters had been found decades earlier. These letters, now yellowed with age, contained cryptic messages that hinted at the darker secrets of the Blackwell family. If they could decipher them, they might be able to end the curse once and for all. But as they ascended to the attic, they realized the truth. The Blackwell mansion was not just a house, it was a prison, built to contain something far more sinister. The attic, once a place of secrets and revelations, now seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were lined with old trunks, filled with the forgotten remnants of a family that had been swallowed by the darkness they had embraced. The letters they found in the attic told a story of power, greed, and unspeakable deed. Reginald Blackwell had made a pact, not just with the occult forces that had cursed his family, but with something far older, an ancient evil that had lain dormant beneath the mansion for centuries. In exchange for wealth and influence, the Blackwells had agreed to a terrible price: the blood of their own children. The letters revealed the shocking truth. The Blackwell children had not been murdered in the traditional sense. They had been sacrificed, their lives taken as part of a ritual designed to secure the family's legacy and seal their power for generations. The mansion had become a vessel for the darkness, and the spirits of the children, trapped between worlds, had become the mansion's guardians, forever bound to the house and its cursed history. With the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place, the investigators realized the full extent of the curse. The mansion itself had become a living entity, feeding on the bloodshed and misery of the Blackwell family. It was not just haunted, it was alive with malice, and its thirst for suffering would never be quenched. As the investigators left the mansion that night, they knew that they had uncovered the truth, but it came at a cost. The mansion had claimed another set of victims, those who had dared to uncover its dark secrets. And as they drove away, they could still hear the faint whispers of the Blackwell children, calling from the shadows, warning them to never return. The mansion stood in the distance, a looming silhouette in the mist, as though it were waiting patiently, expectantly for something or someone. Its windows were dark, the once grand facade now decayed and broken, yet there was still a strange presence about it. The house seemed to breathe, to live, to pulse with an energy that was not entirely human. The investigators, forever changed by what they had experienced within those walls, had left with the unsettling realization that the mansion was not merely haunted, it was a conduit, a gateway to something far more sinister. But the curse of Blackwell Manor did not end with their departure. No, it followed them, haunting them in ways they had never imagined. One by one, the members of the investigation team began to experience strange, unexplainable occurrences. It started with the dream. For Clara, the young woman who had come face to face with the spirit of the child in the hallway, it was the nightmares that plagued her. Every night, she would lie awake in her bed, unable to sleep, the feeling of cold fingers brushing against her skin. In her dreams, she would find herself standing in the foyer of Blackwell Manor, unable to move, her body frozen with terror. The door would creak open, and she would hear the soft pattering of footsteps behind her, childlike and light, yet unnervingly close. And then there were the voices. They called to her, softly at first, a mere whisper of her name. But as the days passed, the voices grew louder, more insistent. They were not just whispers in the wind. No, these voices came from the depths of the house, from the walls themselves, and they were hungry, always asking for something. What exactly they wanted, Clara could never understand. But it was clear, whatever was trapped inside the mansion, it was not going to let her forget it. The others were not spared either. James, the lead investigator, began to lose track of time. He would look up from his work, only to find that hours had passed, and he had no memory of what he had been doing. His house, once a place of calm, had become a prison. At night he would hear the sounds of footsteps upstairs, even though he lived alone. His cat, once playful and affectionate, now hid under the bed, its eyes wide with terror. Then came the visions. James would often find himself standing in the center of a room, the walls closing in around him, suffocating him with their oppressive weight. He would try to move, but his body would not obey. The air would grow thick, and he would feel the unmistakable presence of someone or something watching him. He was not alone. He never was. Despite these horrors, the investigation continued. It was as if the team could not break free from the pull of Blackwell Manor. They were drawn back, over and over again, by a force they could not comprehend. It was as though the house itself had claimed them, and no matter how hard they tried to escape, it would not let them go. Then, one evening, Clara returned to the mansion alone. Her colleagues had tried to warn her. They begged her to leave the past behind, to forget about the mansion and its cursed history. But Clara could not. She could not shake the feeling that there was something she had missed, something important that she needed to find. There were still so many unanswered questions. The spirits of the Blackwell children had made their presence known, but Clara was convinced there was more to the story, something deeper, something darker, that lay hidden beneath the mansion's crumbling floors. Clara stood before the mansion, staring up at its dark windows. As the wind rustled through the trees, the air was thick with the scent of decay. And yet, for all its decay, there was something alive about it. It felt as though the mansion were watching her, waiting for her to make her move. She stepped inside, the door creaking in protest. The familiar scent of dust and mildew filled her lungs. As she made her way through the hallway, the mansion seemed to groan under her footsteps, its walls shifting and bending as if the very house were alive. She moved cautiously, unsure of what she might find, but determined to uncover the truth. As Clara moved through the house, the walls seemed to close in on her. The shadows grew longer, the air colder, and the oppressive weight of the house pressed down on her chest. She could hear the soft, distant sound of children's laughter, a sound both innocent and terrifying. It echoed through the halls, growing louder with each step she took. Clara finally reached the basement, where she had been drawn to before. She had to know what lay beyond the locked door. The door creaked open with ease, as though it had been waiting for her. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the corners. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the faint flickering of her flashlight. At the far end of the room, Clara saw it, a wooden chest, old and worn, but unmistakably important. Her heart raced as she approached it, her hand trembling as she reached for the lid. The chest creaked open, and inside she found something that would change everything. A set of old yellowed letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. Clara's hands shook as she untied the letters and began to read. The letters were from Reginald Blackwell himself, written just before his death. In them he spoke of a terrible bargain he had made, one that had sealed the fate of his family. He had made a pact with something dark, something ancient, in exchange for power and wealth. The price, however, had been steep: the lives of his children. Reginald spoke of the ritual that had taken place in the mansion's basement, the dark ceremony that had bound the spirits of his children to the house, ensuring that the Blackwell family's legacy would endure forever. But there was a catch, a price far greater than he had ever anticipated. The spirits, it seemed, were not content with their fate. They were angry that they had been used as pawns in a game they did not understand, and now they wanted revenge. As Clara read on, she realized the truth. The mansion was not just haunted by the Blackwell children, it was haunted by something much darker, a force that had been bound to the house by Reginald's pact, a force that had taken control of the spirits, turning them into vengeful entities that would never rest until the house was destroyed and the curse was lifted. Clara felt a cold hand brush against her arm, and she turned, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was filled with shadows that seemed to shift and move of their own accord. The laughter of the children echoed in her ears, and she knew with a terrible certainty that she was not alone. Clara felt the coldness intensify as she stood there, the weight of the letters in her hand dragging her further into the depths of the mystery. The laughter of the children echoed through the walls, not a playful sound but an eerie, hollow laughter that sent chills down her spine. Her flashlight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance on their own, as though mocking her presence.
The letters, crinkled and yellowed with age, were the key to unraveling everything. Reginald Blackwell's words still held a haunting power. Words that spoke of a bargain too terrible to contemplate, and of an ancient evil bound to the very foundation of Blackwell Manor, a curse that had darted with a desperate wish for wealth and power, but had spiraled into something far worse. As Clara read, a terrible truth emerged. Reginald Blackwell had not just trapped the souls of his children in the mansion, he had unknowingly summoned a dark force, something far older and more malevolent than any human could ever understand. The rituals he had performed had awakened something that had been slumbering beneath the earth for centuries, an entity that had fed on the souls of the innocent and grown stronger with each passing year. Clara's breath quickened, her heart raced in her chest, almost as if it were trying to break free from the suffocating air. She could hear the whispers now, clearer than before. At first they had been distant, unfocused, but now they were sharp, distinct, and filled with a deep sense of dread. It was as though the house itself was speaking to her, urging her to understand the depth of the horror that had taken place. The whispers grew louder as Clara stepped closer to the corner of the room where the shadows seemed to linger. She looked down at the floor, noticing that the stone had been disturbed. The markings on the ground were faint but unmistakable, symbols etched into the earth, traces of the ritual Reginald had performed all those years ago. As Clara knelt, her hand trembling as she traced one of the symbols, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing her flashlight. She gasped, the darkness swallowing her whole. The temperature dropped dramatically, the chill biting into her skin as though invisible hands were reaching out to pull her into the shadows. Suddenly, the air grew thick with an oppressive force, and the laughter of the children, no longer distant, was now directly in her ear. It was as if they were standing right behind her. Clara spun around, but there was nothing there. The walls seemed to close in, and the darkness deepened. She stood up abruptly, clutching the letters to her chest, as panic began to claw at her. The mansion seemed to be alive, its very foundations trembling with an ancient fury. The whispers were no longer words, they were It was as if the house itself, the entity that Reginald had awakened, was trying to communicate with her, trying to reach through the fabric of time and space, to claim her soul as it had done with the other. Clara stumbled backward, her mind racing, but the door through which she had entered slammed shut, trapping her inside. Her pulse thundered in her ears as the temperature in the room plummeted further. She could see her breath in front of her now, misting the air in front of her face, like the spirits of the dead were surrounding her. The mansion was not just haunted, it was a living, breathing entity, feeding off the spirits of its victim. The Blackwell children were not the only souls trapped within its walls. Clara now understood the terrible truth. The mansion itself was a vessel, a prison for the souls that had been lost, and the curse had grown stronger with each life claimed. Clara's eyes darted around the room. The walls seemed to warp, as if they were alive, shifting and groaning with age. The shadows that had once appeared to be nothing more than the natural product of darkness now seemed to stretch and move within. The mansion was not simply inhabited by ghosts, it had become the home to something far more sinister, a presence that had been bound by Reginald Blackwell's failed bargain and had now grown too powerful to contain. The voices, once faint and distant, now filled the room, filling Clara's mind with disturbing thoughts. They spoke of an entity that fed on fear, on grief, and on lost souls. It was an ancient being, older than the mansion itself, and it had been awakened by Reginald's desperation. The souls of the children had been its first victims, but they were not the last. Clara understood now that the mansion was a vessel,
a place that housed the darkest forces that could ever exist. The children's souls were not trapped within the walls. They were bound to the house itself, the entity feeding off their suffering and using them as pawns in a twisted game of control. Suddenly, a cold hand brushed Clara's arm. She froze, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up as she felt the presence behind her. Slowly, she turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure. It was not fully human. It was a dark, shifting silhouette, its face obscured by the darkness, but Clara could see its eyes filled with rage and hunger. It was not just a ghost, it was the manifestation of the curse itself, the entity that had consumed the Blackwell family and everyone who had dared to enter its walls. It had been waiting for Clara. She had come too close to the truth. Now the mansion would claim her as it had claimed so many others before her. The entity stepped forward, its presence radiating a suffocating force. The whispers grew louder, filling Clara's mind with the unmistakable realization that it was too late. She had uncovered the truth, but in doing so she had sealed her fate. With one final gasp, Clara reached out for the door, but it slammed shut with an unholy force. The sound reverberating through the house like a thunderclap. The shadows closed in, swallowing her whole. The mansion had claimed her, just as it had claimed the children, just as it had claimed Reginald Blackwell's soul. Clara's vision blurred, and in her final moments, she understood the terrible cost of the Blackwell curse. It was never meant to end. The house would never be free, and neither would the souls bound to it. Clara's body felt as though it were drifting, suspended between reality and something far worse. Her heart raced as the cold air of the mansion tightened around her chest, suffocating her. The figure in the doorway, the malevolent force that had taken shape in the darkness, moved closer, its form contorting like shadows bending at the will of an unseen master. The house itself seemed to be alive, pulsing with energy. Each creak of the old wood a reminder of the terrible truth she had uncovered. The mansion was not merely a structure of brick and mortar. It was an entity, an ancient being that had grown strong on the suffering and fear of generations. Clara tried to scream, but her voice was lost in the heavy silence that enveloped the room. The walls seemed to bend inward, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. She could hear whispers now distinct, almost familiar, calling her name, pulling her closer to the entity that stood before her. They weren't just voices from the past, they were the voices of the children, their souls now twisted and tormented, forced to serve the dark power that had claimed them. Clara, the voice was soft, almost tender, but the undertone was chilling. It echoed through her mind, reverberating in her very soul. You shouldn't have come here. You've opened the door, now you'll never leave. Clara spun around, trying to escape, but the shadows were closing in on her. Her legs felt like lead, her body unwilling to move as the mansion seemed to warp and twist around her. The very walls of the room seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and she could feel the weight of the ancient curse pressing down on her like a crushing force. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her ears, the whispers growing louder, their words indistinguishable but filled with malice. She didn't know how much longer she could withstand the pressure, the suffocating grip of the house tightening around her, pulling her into its web of darkness. In the midst of the chaos, Clara's mind raced. She thought of Reginald Blackwell's desperation, of the bargains he had struck and the rituals he had performed to seal his family's fate. The letters in her hands were no longer just words, they were a map, a guide to understanding the horrors that had been unleashed. But it was too late. The curse was already in motion, and no one who entered the mansion had ever escaped it. Desperate, Clara turned toward the window, the faintest sliver of light visible beyond the grime and decay that covered the glass. The mansion's grip seemed to tighten further, as though the house itself had sensed her desire to leave. The walls groaned and shifted, the air growing colder, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to tremble as if the very earth itself were recoiling from her presence. Then she saw it, a shadow moving across the room, a shape that did not belong. The figure, The entity that had been watching her had come closer. It loomed in the corner of the room, its form shifting and flickering like smoke, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. "You've disturbed the peace," it whispered, its voice like 1,000 voices speaking at once. "You've opened the door, and now the price must be paid." Clara's body shook with fear as the figure advanced, its presence filling the room, suffocating her. It reached out toward her, and for a brief moment she saw the faces of the children, pale and hollow-eyed, their faces twisted in eternal torment, their mouths open in silent scream. They were trapped, forever bound to the mansion, and Clara knew, with a sickening certainty, that she was about to join them. The entity reached out again, its hand cold and unfeeling, and Clara felt herself being pulled into the shadow. Her thoughts became disjointed, the world around her fading as the grip of the mansion tightened. She had uncovered the truth, but in doing so, she had sealed her fate. The house had claimed her, just as it had claimed so many before her. Clara's scream echoed through the hallways of Blackwell Mansion, but it was swallowed by the very walls that had held its secrets for centuries. As her body was pulled into the shadowy corner, she fought with every ounce of her strength. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. The stories, the whispers, the curse that had consumed the Blackwell family, everything that had led her to this point felt like a distant nightmare, a tale she'd once read in a book, but never believed could be real. Now she was living. The room around her shifted again, walls bending as though the house itself was breathing. The ancient wood groaned and creaked in protest as the temperature dropped, frost forming along the edges of the wall. The children, their tormented faces still haunting her thoughts, seemed to move in the corners of her vision, their hollow eyes never leaving her. They had been trapped here, victims of something far older than even the mansion. But Clara realized with a sinking heart that she too was now one of them, another lost soul, forever bound to this house of horror. But there was no time to dwell on this. As Clara's body was dragged across the cold stone floor, she forced her mind to focus. She had to find a way out. The truth was clear now. The mansion wasn't just haunted by spirits, it was cursed, twisted by some ancient force that thrived on suffering, and she had walked straight into its web. The Blackwell family had never been a mere collection of wealthy elites. They were part of a darker history, one that Clara was now entwined in. Her fingers brushed against the cold stone of the walls, and she gasped as a cold chill ran through her body. She looked up to find herself face to face with the figure that had been haunting her, its eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. Its shape flickered like smoke, a manifestation of the house's curse. The figure was neither fully human nor fully something else, just a hollow, malevolent presence that existed to feed on fear, on pain. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice a chorus of voices, twisted and distorted, each one colder than the last. "The house has claimed you, as it has claimed them all." Clara's heart pounded in her chest, panic rising in her throat. But even as the figure drew closer, a part of her, an almost detached part, remembered the letters she had discovered, the hidden truths buried within the pages. She still had them, gripped tightly in her hands. They had led her this far, to this cursed place, and perhaps they were the key to understanding the forces that bound this mansion. With trembling hands, Clara pulled the letters from her coat pocket. She held them out in front of her, the paper brittle and fragile from age, but still legible. As her fingers ran over the words, she felt a strange warmth begin to seep into her body, a pulse of energy she couldn't explain. It was as though the house itself was reacting to the letters, aware of the history they contained. "Leave," the entity hissed. "You have no power here." Clara ignored it. She wasn't sure why, but something deep inside her knew this was her only chance. She needed to learn the truth. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. The whispers of the children, their cries filled her mind, urging her to keep going, to fight. Taking a deep breath, Clara began reading the letters aloud. The words were a litany of old rituals, desperate pleas, and dark bargains that the Blackwell family had made to secure their power. She read of blood sacrifices, of ancient pacts that tied their souls to the mansion, and of a terrible ritual that required a pure soul to be sacrificed, trapped within the walls forever, never to leave. As Clara read, the air in the room grew heavier, and the figure before her began to rise. The energy in the room intensified as though the words themselves were unraveling something deep within the mansion, something powerful and old. "You cannot undo what has been done," the figure shrieked, its voice shattering like glass. "The curse is eternal." Clara's heart raced faster, but she pressed on, determined. As she spoke the final words of the letter, a surge of energy filled the room, and the walls seemed to tremble. The floor beneath her feet cracked open with a deep resonating thud. A door hidden for centuries creaked open at the far end of the room. It was an escape, but it wasn't a way out of the mansion. It was a path deeper into the heart of the curse. Clara hesitated for a moment, her mind battling with the fear that had gripped her heart for so long. The path before her was both an answer and a danger. She had to go, though. The mansion wasn't just going to let her go free, but if she could make it through, perhaps she could break the curse once and for all. As she walked toward the door, the figure tried to stop her, reaching out with shadowy hands that seemed to claw at her mind. "You'll never leave," it growled. "None of us ever leave." Clara turned her back on the figure, her mind set. She stepped through the door into the darkness, not knowing what awaited her, but knowing that it was the only way forward. The walls of the mansion closed in behind her, sealing the path she had come from. But ahead, the blackness beckoned, and in that darkness, Clara knew she would either find the truth or be lost forever. Clara's footsteps echoed in the thick darkness as she ventured deeper into the heart of Blackwell Mansion, the door she had passed through shutting behind her with a final heavy thud. The oppressive air grew colder, each step she took toward the unknown sending a chill down her spine. She could feel the mansion shifting around her, like it was alive, watching, listening, waiting. The smell of decay and age seemed to follow her, mingling with the faint metallic scent of blood, reminding her of the horrors that had taken place within these walls. For a moment, she wondered if she had made the right choice, but the letters in her hand burned with urgency, the knowledge within them pushing her forward. Clara's mind kept racing back to the children, their ghostly faces haunting her thoughts. Were they trapped in this place, cursed to wander forever, like the Blackwell family? And could she find a way to stop it all?
Her heart beat fast as she descended a narrow stone staircase. The walls of this part of the mansion were thick, as if the house had been built not just to stand, but to conceal something dangerous. With each step down, Clara's sense of dread grew, but so did her resolve. The curse could be broken. She had to believe that the letters had pointed to this exact moment. There was something deep within the mansion, a chamber hidden beneath the foundations, that held the answers she sought. The darkness around her thickened, and Clara reached for the lantern she had carried with her. The dim light barely pierced the shadows as it flickered on. It was the only thing between her and the void, but she gripped it tightly, refusing to let fear take hold of her. The walls seemed to narrow as she continued deeper, but there was no turning back now. She was this close. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a long, low passageway, its walls lined with ancient carvings. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, and something darker, something that felt unnatural, as if the house itself had swallowed history and secrets whole. The carvings on the walls were twisted and intricate, showing figures in strange positions, their faces contorted in agony and fear. The images sent a shiver through her, reminding her that whatever had been done here was not just evil, it was ancient. Clara pressed on, her pulse racing, as the passage seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, she reached a large wooden door. Unlike any she had seen in the mansion before, it was massive and old, with deep carvings etched into its surface. The same symbols from the walls were repeated here, and Clara's hands trembled as she reached for the handle. As she pushed the door open, the air changed. A cold wind rushed past her, and the faintest sound of whispers reached her ears. Clara hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the chamber beyond. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in the shadows above. The walls were covered in dark, faded tapestries that seemed to move of their own accord, rippling slightly in the air like something alive. The center of the room was dominated by a stone altar, its surface covered in old, dried blood. The altar was surrounded by strange, twisted symbols that matched those in the letters she had read. The air here was thick with the remnants of rituals long forgotten, rituals that had bound the Blackwell family to this cursed place. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, her eyes scanning the room for any clues as to what she was meant to do. Then her gaze fell upon something that sent a chill through her body. A small wooden chest, sitting upon the altar, its surface worn and scratched, as if it had been handled for centuries. The chest was old, its wood darkened with age, but it seemed to radiate an unsettling energy, pulling Clara toward it. She reached for it, her fingers trembling, and as her hand touched the surface, the room seemed to shake. The whispers grew louder, now clear, calling her name, beckoning her to open the chest. With a deep breath, Clara unlocked the chest and lifted the lid. Inside there was nothing at first, only the darkness of the chest's interior. But as Clara peered closer, a faint, almost imperceptible glow emerged from the depths of the chest, casting an eerie light across her face. It was a book, an old, weathered journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, the leather binding cracked and worn. Clara's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the truth she had been searching for, hidden for centuries. She reached for the journal, her hands shaking, and pulled it out of the chest. As soon as her fingers touched the pages, the whispers stopped. The room went silent. Opening the journal, she began to read the first entry, her eyes widening as she absorbed the words. The journal was filled with the history of the Blackwell family, but it was not a history of wealth or power. It was a history of dark rituals, of bloodlines corrupted by ancient pacts and sacrifices. The Blackwell family had not only sought to control the mansion, but they had also sought to control the very forces of life and death. They had made bargains with beings far older than they could comprehend, and those bargains had come at a terrible price. The journal revealed that the mansion itself was not just a home, it was a prison for souls that had been sacrificed in the name of power, trapped beneath the mansion's foundations, bound to its walls for eternity. Clara's hands shook as she read about the ritual that had cursed the Blackwell family, a ritual that had required the lives of children, the innocent victims of the family's insatiable thirst for power. But there was more. As Clara turned the pages, she found a hidden entry, one that had been written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. It spoke of a way to break the curse, to free the trapped souls, but it came with a warning. The price for breaking the curse was steep, and it would require a sacrifice. A life had to be given willingly, and the person who offered that life would be bound to the mansion forever. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Was she willing to make that sacrifice? Was there even another way out? The weight of the decision pressed down on her, but Clara knew what she had to do. The mansion had to be freed from its dark grasp. She had to break the curse, no matter the cost. The lost children, the Blackwell family, and even the house itself. Everything had to be set free. But as she turned to the final page of the journal, she saw something that froze her in place. A warning in bold, shaky letters.
Do not trust the mansion. It is watching. It will never let you go. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. As the air around her grew thick with an unseen presence, she wasn't alone anymore. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the words of the final page burned into her mind. Do not trust the mansion. It is watching. It will never let you go. The warning echoed like a chilling chant reverberating through her skull. The air grew thicker, heavier with a presence she could feel, but not see. The mansion was alive. She was no longer just in it. It was in her, inside her very bones, feeding on her fear, her resolve. The room grew colder as the shadows seemed to shift and twist, reaching toward her. The whispers, which had stopped when she touched the journal, returned, now louder, clearer, swirling around her like a storm of voices, begging, pleading, threatening. Clara's eyes darted around the chamber, but there was no escape. The door she had entered through was gone, swallowed by the walls. She was trapped. Her heart raced. The journal, the truth, everything she had discovered. It was all coming to a head. Clara had come so far. She had followed the trail of the Blackwell family, uncovered their dark past. And now, standing in the heart of the mansion, the choice lay before her. The curse could be broken, but the price would be steep. The journal had made it clear. One life had to be given to free the mansion, to release the trapped souls, to end the horrors that had plagued this house for centuries. But whose life was she willing to pay that price? Clara closed her eyes, her mind raced. The letters she had read had pointed her toward this moment. The stories of the Blackwell family, the strange disappearances, the whispers of the dead children, it all came back to this. But the mansion itself was a living entity, and Clara understood now that it was not merely a house of stone and wood. It had been built upon something older, something far more ancient and sinister, a being, a force that had thrived on pain, suffering, and death. It had been feeding off the Blackwell family's greed, their sacrifice, and their broken promises. Her fingers tightened around the journal. As the temperature in the room plummeted, the shadows seemed to twist into shapes, figures that loomed in the corners of her vision, flickering like half-formed specters. She could hear them. Children, their voices soft and distant, whispering in a language she couldn't understand. The air smelled of damp earth, rot, and decay, a smell that clung to her clothes, her skin, as if it would never leave. The lantern she carried flickered weakly, casting long stretching shadows on the walls. The journal's words were burned into her mind, each phrase heavier than the last. One life, a life given willingly. The curse will be lifted. And then the presence in the room stirred again. Clara turned, her eyes wide, her body frozen in place. There, standing in the doorway to the chamber, was a figure, a tall, pale woman, with hollow eyes and a face twisted in pain. She was dressed in an old-fashioned gown, her long hair hanging loosely around her face. A child's broken doll clutched in her hands. Clara could feel her chest tighten as the figure stepped forward, her feet barely touching the ground. The woman's gaze was fixed on her, the emptiness in her eyes more unsettling than anything Clara had ever seen. The woman spoke in a voice that was both distant and near, her words laced with sorrow and grief. "You've come to end it," the woman said, her voice almost a whisper. "But the price must be paid." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Who are you?" The woman's lips trembled, and she raised the doll in her hands, her fingers trembling. "I was one of them," she said softly. "I was the first to die, the first to be taken, the first to be part of this house's curse." Clara's heart stopped. "You were one of the children," the woman nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Clara's. "Yes, and so were they. All of us, children, sacrifices, pawns in their twisted game." Her eyes darkened, and she whispered, "They never cared for us. Not really. We were just tools to fulfill a promise they made long ago." Clara stepped forward, her pulse pounding. "The Blackwell family, they made a deal." The woman's gaze flickered with pain. "Not just a deal, a blood oath, to bind the house, to bind the power that resided beneath it. The mansion became a prison, a living, breathing thing. The souls of the children were trapped here, bound to its walls, feeding the house's hunger for power. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. So the mansion, it was never just a house. The woman shook her head slowly. No, it was built on a curse. A curse that bound us all. We were born to die, born to fuel the mansion's power. The house is more than a building, Clara. It is a creature, a beast, that feeds on death and sorrow. Clara's mind reeled. And if I break the curse, what will happen? The woman's eyes darkened. The mansion will be free. The children's souls will be freed. But not without a price. A life must be given willing. That's how it works. Clara's hands shook as she clutched the journal tighter. And if I offer my life? The woman's face softened, and her voice became gentler. You'll free them all, but you will be bound to the mansion. Your soul will remain here, trapped in the walls, just like mine. You will become part of it. The house will claim you as it claimed me. Clara felt a lump in her throat. The weight of the decision bore down on her. The mansion, this cursed, twisted place, had taken so much from so many, and now she stood at the crossroads, the only one who could end it all. But the cost was more than she had ever imagined. The woman stepped closer, her gaze filled with sorrow. You can break the curse, Clara. You can set us all free, but you will never leave this place. Clara's breath caught the weight of the journal's words, the woman's plea. It all pressed upon her, suffocating her. She closed her eyes, trying to think, to reason, but there was no escape. The mansion was alive, and it was feeding on her fear, her doubt. I don't want to stay here forever, Clara whispered, her voice trembling. The woman's face grew softer, her smile melancholic. Then you must choose. The mansion will only let you go if you give it your soul. If you truly want to break the curse, you must offer yourself freely. The figure took a step back, fading into the shadows once more, leaving Clara with nothing but the chilling silence of the mansion and the weight of her choice. The room was still. The whispers had died down. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the darkness, her mind racing. One choice, one moment, that would decide the fate of the mansion, the souls trapped within, and her own future. She looked down at the journal in her hands, the weight of its truth pressing against her heart. The curse had to end, but would she be able to pay the price? With one final breath, Clara stepped forward, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice to set the trapped souls free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat.